Hello, you guys, and welcome back to the Until Jesus Turns This Campus podcast. I am your host, Lauren, and today we will be continuing our mini-series, I guess, from last week, continuing and rounding up, answering the questions from our T-Rock service where you guys ask questions and we answer them. And so today I'm joined with Pastor John. His ADHD is a little wild, so that's why he's holding the couch cushion. But we are excited, and yeah, you ready to jump in?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. So this week, we'll be talking a lot about mental health and growing in your walk with Christ and all of those things. So to start off, the first question was, if I'm still having anxiety about a situation, does that mean that I'm not truly giving myself to God?
That's a tricky question because no one knows what's in someone's head. I can speak of this. When I was going through anxiety and panic attacks, I knew all the right scriptures. God was still using me, but I was right in the middle of the panic attack and anxiety.
Right.
So I would say yes. It is okay to have those things when you're struggling with anxiety and panic attacks or those things. It doesn't mean that God is far from you.
Yeah.
It could be stuff that's happening from the yesterday of your life. Could be a situation that you're currently going through, but it's common. So we got to be careful that every time we go through something difficult, it doesn't grade our relationship with God.
Right.
So if you're this person, you're asking this, I would say, where is it coming from? Where is the anxiety coming from? As I think back to my anxiety, I know God was still using me. And I don't think he's a God that shows up in the room and says, hey, get better.
Yeah.
So that's a complicated answer, but I would say no, God doesn't mean so much that you're in a bad place with God just because you're experiencing the broken world in which we live, right?
And I think also it's a big misconception that if we step into obedience with God or if we surrender things, that he's going to take all of those things away.
Absolutely.
And that's not true because, I mean, you've dealt with anxiety. I myself have dealt with anxiety, and I still go through seasons where I'm anxious about stepping in the places that God wants me to be. And I step into those places and I'm still anxious. And it doesn't, just because we give our lives to Christ or give situations to Christ doesn't mean that he's going to take all of the hard things out of those situations.
Nor does it necessarily correlate to you being in a bad place. Right. I mean, let's answer this like really straight up. Let's say there's a college student out there that loves Jesus, but has grown up in maybe a broken home where there's abuse, and next door she's hearing some of this happening, or there's things around her that's going on. So that doesn't mean that she's in a bad place or he's in a bad place. It just means that, like you were saying, it's a broken world.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Right, absolutely. Okay, the next question says, how do I go to the Lord when I feel so sinful and broken?
Just as you are.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, you look in the scriptures in all the brokenness of individuals that we see, whether that's Peter, whether that's, a situation even with Thomas that we talked about yesterday. Jesus is engaged already. We just have to acknowledge that he's there.
Right.
So what do? Hey, Jesus, I know I'm not in the place you desire me to be, but I know you still love me.
Right.
So help me remember how much I'm loved, and help me remember that the best way to get back is one step at a time, and acknowledging that things maybe that I'm doing are unhealthy.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think also when I was reading this question, I feel like there's a really big difference in being so sinful and broken and too sinful and broken.
Right.
And so you can be wrapped up in a lot of sin and in a lot of brokenness, and God can still use you. Yeah. You will never be too sinful or too broken to be used by God. And so I think that is where we have to start, is understanding the fact that you may be so sinful and broken, but you're not too sinful and broken. And then, like you said, going about it with, God uses, and I say it all the time, like, my testimony is so ugly. and it's not pretty. And I know a lot of people who have a testimony that's wrapped up a little neater in a bow, and some people who don't even have wrapping on it yet. But that is the beauty of each and every testimony, is that they're used for different things. And a big part of my testimony was, depression and anxiety and drinking, and I'm able to relate to those things. But I've never been through an abusive relationship, whereas some people, that may be part of their testimony. And so where I can't relate to other people, people around me can. And so I think just understanding, like, you are never too sinful or too broken for God. He is always waiting and close and ready. Yeah. And I think it's more on our part to just be ready to surrender those things to Him. So, okay, next one. When going through hard times mentally and I step away from Jesus, not on purpose, but end up doing so, how do I get back in the same spot I was?
Same way you got out,
yeah.
you know. This is... all these questions hinge on the fact of how you view God. And if you view God as someone that you have to win approval to get a seat in front of, then it changes everything. It changes all the perspective that you have. When you see God as someone that loves you, and the sin stuff, the stuff that we get into, it's not the best life for us. To imagine, maybe it's something like this, Lauren, that you imagine that you're coming into a room and you're sitting down with God and He's telling you, hey, I love you, but what you're doing is not a good thing. And the lie is this. It's like, okay, so we stay away from the Word. When we have maybe disobeyed our parents, or we've done things that we shouldn't do, it was always awkward for me as a child because I knew that I had ticked off my parents, right? Yeah. But naturally, eventually, everything went back to normal. And so just re-enter what you're doing. Maybe it's reading a scripture or reading a devotional. Just get back one moment at a time, and you're going to get there. Because again, He's already there waiting on you.
And I think something that stuck out to me was at the end where it says, how do I get back to the same spot I was at? And I think it's important to know that you may not necessarily go back to that exact same spot, because a relationship with God is not like going up to this high peak and then going down and then going straight back up. Like, there's slopes and there's things that are going to happen in that, and we have to be okay with that. And I think okay in finding beauty in the mess ups, and in finding beauty in the walking away but coming back and being in a different place and still finding joy in that place. And that doesn't always mean like when you come back to Him, you're going to be in a lower place. Because I think God uses so many things to build who we are. But that's, if we're always chasing to be back in the same place that we left, we're not doing something right. And I think that we should always chase to be further, to always walk further. And
I think we have to, and that is so wise. At the same time, we have to be aware that Christianity, following Christ isn't about a feeling. Because there's some moments that, I know maybe on a Wednesday or Tuesday, I have to get in the Word. And I do every day, but I know I need to prepare for the message. But I'm like, I don't want to do this. And so you've got to be careful of the feelings. I think when we describe it as a place, like you said, I think sometimes we're searching for that good feeling. And sometimes it's just not there. And it's like, okay, there's a lot of things going on in my life right now. I know God loves me. I know that He's present, but it just doesn't feel like it did before.
Because I think a lot of times, you're chasing that feeling, like you said, and it's not, I want to be careful how I say this, because not that there's not good in every step of a walk with Christ, but it's not always going to make you feel good. And I think a lot of times it's like, well, I'm going to pray, and when God makes me feel good about the decision, that's when I'm making the right decision. And it's not always that. And there's times where you will, and I faced it with school when I really wanted to be a teacher, and that was my goal and my longing for so long. And I finally came to the realization that God didn't have me in that, and I chose a different major. And in the moment, I felt so low to the ground. And I had people that made me feel that way, and I had circumstances that made me feel that way. And I felt like nothing. and I knew that God was in the moment, but it didn't make me feel good. Absolutely. And now coming out, I'm able to feel good about the situation, but it's not always going to be that, and every right choice with God is going to make you feel good. Like that's not true.
Right. Not at all.
So, okay. Next question is, how do you deal with family changes and look towards Jesus during those changes? So maybe that's divorce, maybe that's loss of a sibling, whatever that may be.
Well, I think, grief, and I wrote these down on this paper, to allow yourself to go through the grief process with, it says shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and accepting. So, know that you're going to wake up each day and it's going to look different.
Yeah.
I was talking to a kid the other day in a counseling session, and he's a young kid. And I said, how are you taking this? He said, it's hard. And I said, why? And he said, because my parents are fighting all the time. I was like, okay, so, but now they're going to get a divorce. And he's like, yeah. And I said, and how do you feel about that? And he said, well, there's just a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. And I think for us to understand, to allow ourselves to be in a place when there's change, when there's vast change, to know that only constant and consistency is Jesus, but sometimes he feels very far in those moments. But to understand there's a process, to understand there's a grieving process, to understand that there's one day, it's we're talking about, you may like, okay, I got this under control, it's going to be okay. And the next day, oh my gosh, my world's falling apart. Yeah. To make sure you give yourself room to be you. Yeah. At the same time, finding other people to walk beside you. Yeah. Super important.
And I think the biggest thing for me, and I haven't dealt with a lot of changes in family, but a lot of young deaths in my life and things like that. And I think that the biggest thing that helped me in my walk with grief, and I still struggle, and yesterday was Allison, which some of you guys watching may not even understand that story, but she was a young girl that was a part of our college ministry that passed away a little less than a year ago. Yesterday was her birthday. And I sat and I struggled and I cried, but I think the biggest thing that has helped me in all of that is understanding that the why isn't always for us to know. Right. Nope, and I think it was hard, and it's hard for me to say because I understand how hard it is to comprehend that, because I've been in that, and it's still hard. And I mean, my parents lost a dog not that long ago, and sounds silly to some people, but that dog was my dad's best friend. And I remember my mom just crying and my dad crying and just saying, I don't understand why. Right. And it's hard. And I think that's something that leads us to a lot of struggle in the grieving process, is because we're always longing after the why. And I think that the sooner that we can come to terms, and I feel like it sounds kind of harsh, but just coming from a place of grief, is that the sooner that we can understand that the why isn't always going to be for us to know, it'll make that next step in grief easier, because I feel like that is the biggest thing just in my grief journey, at least. And I am confident that maybe in some other people's grief journey is that was what was holding me back for a really long time. And especially, with Allison, she's so young, and it's like she's so on fire for God. Like, how do you take that away? And I just rest in the fact that that's not for me to know, and it doesn't make missing that person any easier. And even maybe if it's not a death, like divorce, it doesn't make wishing that your family was still whole any easier, but I think it may help in the grieving of your heart.
And don't project that upon your future life. Don't live in the lie that, okay, just because there's this pain happening of divorce or whatever on my life or my parents' life, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be on my journey in the future. And we just got through with the the lead team, the interviews, and a lot of times when people come in and say they came from a broken family, I'd always say, okay, do you believe in forever? And just making sure that they realize that the choices of their parents doesn't necessarily mean they don't have something great waiting
and I think
for them.
that was something so cool that I noticed when you had asked that every time. Every single person said, "Yeah,
yeah,"
and it's like
you don't hear that very much.
Yeah.
In reality, you
and
don't.
so to hear people, be so confident in the fact that maybe that wasn't your parents. That wasn't the way that your parents worked out, but God does have.
Yeah.
If He calls you to be in marriage with somebody, He has somebody that is made for forever
Absolutely.
with you.
Yes.
And that isn't for everybody. And we have talked about so much recently that marriage and relationships are not for everybody. But I think it's beautiful to see that.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like divorce has become so normal nowadays to see that people still do believe in forever. And it's sweet because it is true.
Yes.
Okay. Does God judge you when you get to heaven? Does He judge you before you get into heaven? Are you punished? All the things.
Okay. Good question. Revelation 20, 11 through 15. I'm not going to read it, but Revelation 20, 11 through 15 speaks of the judgment if your name's not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, right? So if in basically that judgment is, okay, are you a believer? Have you trusted in Jesus, or you haven't? And if you haven't, of course, you're cast into hell, right? But the other is the Revelation 14, 10 through 12, and that's more for the follower of Jesus. Although, we are forgiven, there is an account made for what we have done with our life, and it's, okay, so what you have been given, what have you lived out? So, and again, any good thing at that point is at the foot of Jesus, right? So there is an account, but it's not a judgment.
Right.
We give an accountability for what we've done with what we have. In that sense, not with money, not with that stuff, but the gifts that God has given us, have we used those? Right. But the judgment is not condemnation.
Right. God's not going to say, like, you didn't do enough, so you can't get in. Like, I think that yes or no is simply from, have you trusted in me? But absolutely. I think it is important that to understand that. Because it's not just about, it is about giving our life to Christ, but then from that, how is God going to use you? And so that's good. Okay. Does Jesus love you if you are gay? Very straightforward.
Okay. I wish I had this person in front of me, because this is a very difficult question. Because the perspective of someone's asking it, what perspective, do I believe that Jesus loves someone who is gay? Absolutely. And why do I hesitate in it? The reason I hesitate in it, not because of the word gay. If you put any sin, does Jesus love an adulterer? And I know I have to be careful in comparing those two, right? Because there's going to be some heat maybe from that. But the idea of, if we come to the point of saying, okay, is being gay a sin? According to what I read in the scriptures, yes. Does that mean that if you're gay, you're not going to heaven? Absolutely not. Have you given your life to Jesus? Have you been in a process of trying to live out the truth of who Jesus is? And is there conviction there? Does that make sense? So God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. How are you going to respond to that love? So remove gay and put any other. Does God love, someone who covets or whatever, or someone who's selfish? It hinges on what you do with the word gay.
Yeah.
Does that mean that someone, again, who is gay, does that mean that they're, again, have no relationship with Jesus? Absolutely not. Because that's a temptation just like everything else. Yeah. And so whoever asked this question, I'd love to sit down and talk to them face to face. This would be really good. So.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. How do you deal with feeling numb and having no passion for God? If you're paranoid that you don't have time for God, how do you overcome that? So there's things in life that get ahead of us. How do you kind of overcome feeling like...
Right. The numbness, wow. Next time I think we just need to continue to answer these questions within T-Rock Night. Because, man, there are moments that you're just, and again, it comes back to the feeling, right? there are moments that you're just not going to feel close.
Yeah.
You know, let's put it in a marriage. You know, are there moments that in my life that Christy just loves me to death? No, I annoy her. I know I do. And are there moments of tension in our marriage? Absolutely. Are there moments that it just doesn't feel as good as it does other days?
Right.
For sure. But that doesn't mean we're less married.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that Christy doesn't love me or I don't love her. It means that, hey, we're in a moment. And a person that feels numb, they could be in a moment. And so how do we get out of a tangible experience in our marriage is continuing to go. I know the motive of my wife's heart is to love Jesus as much as she can. She knows the motive of my heart is to love Jesus as much as I can. So stepping into each day knowing the heart of the person is seeking to do that which God desires. And so the reason I bring that out is understanding that we know that He is a God of love.
Yeah.
And so how do we journey back to Him? It's one step at a time. Continue to go through it. When you're reading the Bible, when you're praying, you may not have that feeling.
Right.
But at the same time, just take one step in front of the other and continue to do life.
Yeah.
But again, the tangibility of having someone that you can open up to, and we were just talking about this in office, right? I mean, this is the reality of it all. You need those people because, yes, first we need to go to God, and maybe Psalm 139 that remind that we are created with a purpose. Ephesians 2:10, Genesis 1, all this understanding. Romans 8, that nothing can separate us, and starting there, but then also saying, okay, God, who do I have in my life that I can go talk to? Because then, especially a follower of Jesus speaking to another follower of Jesus, saying, hey, for example, Christy, you are a blessing. Here are some things that I see you do. And it's not to bring pride out of that, but help someone remember how God is working in those situations. So
yeah. And I think just to touch on it really quick, because you mentioned that we were just talking about that. We just had conversations about like accountability partners and mentors. And I think that sometimes that's kind of labeled as something that you need only when you're going through like deep struggles.
Right.
And that's so not true. And I mean, I literally just told them earlier, I was like, I feel like I'm in a place where I love Jesus and I'm on fire for God, but I come to church sometimes and I don't always feel like I'm like getting something. And we go through seasons where we're tired, where we're burnt out, that doesn't mean that you're done with God forever or done with the work that He has in you forever. But I think that finding those people to encourage you,
and then opening up, right?
Yes.
Because,
and being open to hearing.
Yes. Because if we take a snapshot of you, Lauren, I don't know, 2 hours ago, maybe we're not doing this, right? Podcast, but, sitting in the office with Taylor and myself, and, we're being real with one another. At the end, being able to see you starting to realize some things, not because, maybe Taylor, but not that I have all the wisdom in the world, but just understanding that, hey, you know what, Lauren, this is a moment, and that helped you get through this time. Is it over forever? No. You still have to battle it,
right.
But having people saying, hey, here's the reality of what you're forgetting to see.
Right. That's good. Okay. Okay, this kind of, I'm going to read it. It kind of goes off of what we just talked about, but if you have anything else to add, it says, is having fears or doubts about your relationship with Christ normal, and how do I get out of those feelings?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to be totally transparent here. I used to be, Christy and I used to be directors of a camp, huge camp, 1,000 students come in. Yep, 1,000 students came in. We got a guy come in, and a great speaker. And me leading the camp, I got on stage and said, hey, I was saved tonight. It was crazy. And so, with that said, it was many years ago, but I was going through a tough time, and I was like, oh crap, maybe I'm not in. So I'm just going to get in. I'm going to tell everyone this camp just got saved. And they're like, praise God, the director of the camp got saved. Right. And there's going to be doubts, in understanding those doubts are real. But I think it's important to go back and say, okay, have I seen God transform my life? Have I seen a desire for God? And understand, if Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and I think the ultimate goal is to distract us, then there's going to be moments of doubt. Yeah. You look at the disciples, many desert Jesus, right? And so there's going to be those moments.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's good. Okay, this next question, I want to preface this by saying, if this was you that asked this, or if you are somebody that has gone through this, actually the very first podcast episode that we filmed on this channel goes into a deep dive just over this. So I would also recommend listening to that, but I want your insight on it as well.
Okay.
What is a good place to start diving into God's word when I haven't read the Bible before, or how do you start reading the Bible?
Right. Oh man, this is everyone. And I don't know why they do, but a lot of people go to the Gospel of John. And I like John. It's really good. I think it's easy to read, but there are some hard stuff to maybe get through from the beginning. Saying, well, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And you're like, what does that even mean? And also understanding, just to say that if you're reading and you don't understand a portion, that's okay. Just keep reading. But I really like portions of books like 1 John. I love 1 John because it's very, very, very plainly written. And the purpose of 1 John is to show that you do have a relationship with Jesus. Yeah. Scriptures like Colossians 3, Ephesians 5, Philippians 4. Those are some places I would start, and just to get a handle on who you are now. Transforming that life of the old and who you were versus who you are. Yeah. And then maybe get into the Gospels where you're looking at what Jesus did and really focusing. Don't get lost so much on all the happenings that's going on, but okay, who is this Jesus? Another one, Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount, blessed are those that, and really jumping into those things that help you start to understand who you are. Yeah. I think someone that just, hey, I'm a new Christian, I'm going to start a reading plan from Genesis, your mind's going to be, what in the world is happening? Literally. Just after about the first, Genesis 3, maybe. So, so there are some ways and some things to think through.
Yeah. Next question. How do I focus on quiet time when all of my other thoughts are so much louder?
Okay. First of all, my thoughts are louder all the time. I have to get away. Yeah. Whether it's in the back of the house, whether it's outside, I have to get away.
John will text us sometimes and just be like, I'm staying at home to work today because I need to get a sermon ready.
I have to. And, but this is what I do too, Lauren. It's my quiet times are walking, you've got to find that place. So what deafens the noise? First of all, what is the other noise? Yeah. Is it fear, anxiety, depression, whatever? But another way is to set a timer on your phone, 5 minutes or so, 2 minutes, and just push all the stuff out. And once that is there, then move forward in what you want to read.
Yeah.
And then praying also, hey, God, my mind is going nuts right now. Please slow me down and let me focus for the next 2-3 minutes.
That is what has worked greatly in my life. Right. Is just because I literally my brain hurts. Right now we've literally been in 3 days of interviews back to back. My brain hurts. And I know that if I sat down to read the Bible right now, my brain would hurt. Right. And I've been in, actually, that's kind of how the story of the night where I really came to Jesus, and I had known Jesus my whole life, but came to actually giving my life to Christ was I sat down to read my Bible one night, and I just felt, I think for some people and for me, that is how one of the ways that the enemy attacks me, because he knows that I can be good about getting in that time, but he knows that if he speaks too loudly in my brain, that I'll get distracted and just give up. And so I think a lot, if that is you, and it's not always going to work, like I think sometimes you have to go outside maybe, or go find a different place. But for me, it's always been just literally sitting and being like, God, please just remove every voice, every distraction, everything from my life right now that's distracting me from you. Right. Remove it. And I will always remember that night, because I prayed that prayer, and then I sat there for 2 hours and was able to just focus on the word and on God and literally give my whole life to Christ. And I bawled and all of the things. But from that moment on, I did not hear another voice. And it doesn't always work like that for some people. Not at all. But I think that is what has helped me majorly.
It's good.
So, okay. Oh no. This one says, I got saved and baptized at a very young age and didn't fully understand what I was doing at the time. And now I feel like I didn't actually do it. What should I do now?
Talk to someone.
Yeah.
And I guess, so you're talking to us. This is, I like this question for the fact I think a lot of people go through this. I got saved. I came to a relationship with Jesus, not by my own power at all, at age 9. Mm-hmm. But I had very little discipleship, so I didn't know what it was to follow Jesus. I didn't know there was a security in Jesus. I didn't know any of this stuff. So, here's the thing. If you're unsure, say, okay, God, I don't know what happened at age 7. I don't know what happened, but today I'm committing, right? Today I'm committing to you. I don't know what happened yesterday, but today I'm committing to you. And, when you get to heaven, and God's not going to say, well, make up your decision. Was it when you were 7 or when you were 21, And so talk to God, whatever the peace you have. If you don't feel like that was the moment, then make it the moment now.
Yeah.
And be baptized, because there we go. You can own it.
Yeah, I went through something very similar several times in my life. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the Catholic Church, where that happened very, very young. Yeah. Almost like now what we consider like a child dedication was looked at as being like saved and baptized, at least in the church that I was in. Uh-huh. And then another time when I was in youth, where I literally got up with my group of friends at a youth camp, and they all had something to say, and I was like, well, let me find what I'm going to say. And it was like,
that's right.
I gave my life to Christ tonight, and I had no idea what that meant. But somebody else said it, so I was going to claim it as my own too. And I remember having a very deep talk with a friend of mine the night that I realized I had truly given my life to Christ. And I was so worried, because I had been baptized, like, I think twice, maybe 3 times at this point. And none of which and it's not anybody's fault, but none of which I truly understood what that meant. Right. And I was just like, I know that the people at my church back at home are going to look at me and be like, what is up with this girl? Like, we baptized her twice. The Catholic Church baptized her once. Now the non-denominational church is going to baptize her. Like, what's going on? But then that friend looked at me and encouraged me and just said, if this is your moment, take that moment. Yeah. There is and if somebody else is judging you because of what's happened in your past, or she's already been baptized, she's already been saved, why is she making this decision again? Then they have a problem with God to work on. Right. Because God does not call us to judge people like that. And I don't. And he looked at me and he said, I was baptized and saved in the same way that you have said you were before, and I firmly believe that was it for me. But if that wasn't it for you, then you go do what it is for you. And so I think there is no limitations to how God says approach giving your life to me the right way. Like, and that's why we always say, like, you can say this prayer, but really it's in you and your heart, and in you confessing to God that I believe that you're my Savior. I'm giving my life to you. And that's all that it is. And it doesn't have to be the right words. It doesn't have to be the right water. We always joke, like, there's nothing special about the Stephenville, like, nasty water. It's not saving you, right. But it's, that's just, baptism is just a signification of, hey, I've given my life to Christ. And I always catch myself saying, there's nothing really special to it. There's something so special to baptism, but there's nothing special in the fact of it's not saving you. It's not making that decision for you.
It's not.
And so I think if now is the time that you have committed your life to Christ, go for it. Like, I don't think that there's limitations to
This
that.
is what I have a story for this. This is hilarious. It wasn't too long ago. Our son went to an event at another church, in which we love the events at other churches. And Christy had me go get him because it was like taking forever. And I went in and she's like, what took you so long? He's like, well, I was in there and they're baptizing kids and students, and Jordan was baptized. And I was like, and she's like, no, he was already baptized. And so he can't be baptized again. I'm like, do you want to just go back in there and tell him? And so it was so funny. She's like, well, when he comes and, we're going to talk to it. And I remember him getting back in, he didn't even have like any type of clothes to be baptized. So he gets back in the car completely wet. And so I kind of poked at Christy and I was like, so Jordan, what happened? And it's like, oh, I just was baptized. And Christy's like, Jordan, I thought you already, he's like, yeah, Mom. Yeah. I know I was saved, but I just didn't really grasp the understanding of why I was baptized. So I wanted to own that. Yeah. And so I think sometimes I can do the same thing too, but we can do prejudgments upon things. And like if somebody walks in here every Sunday and says, oh, I'm going to get baptized and I'm going to save and baptize, there's an issue, right? Yeah. Not an issue with them, just an issue of helping them understand who they are in Jesus. But yeah, you talked to me 15 years ago. I was hard bent. I want to make sure I don't say the other word. I was hard bent on the fact of like, no, we've got to figure it out to the day. And it's just, sometimes it's not that easy.
Yeah. Right. Okay, next question. There's only a few more.
Only a few more. That's good.
What if I don't feel qualified enough to step into my calling?
Well, I think Christy answered this and kind of took us off stage the other day, right? No one
literally ran on stage.
No one is defined or qualified by other human beings, right? And I lived in that world too. And I think when it disappeared, I had the degree, I had the master's. Got it all just in time to go to Haiti. And I was like, oh, look at all I know. And no one cared, right? Yeah. I was qualified based upon how well I love people.
Right.
So you can have the best speaker, the best worship band, whatever. But if they're, in 1 Corinthians talks about this, if there's love, there's nothing. I think you're qualified based upon how you love people. And because if you love God and you love people, you have an audience. And if you have an audience, you're qualified.
Yeah. I think I've heard a saying before that has always stuck with me. And it was, I hope I say this right. God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Yes. And I think that, in all reality, like nothing trains us to care for other humans. Like that's
a lot of the disciples were fishermen. Yeah. Nothing if you're like, I guess, who's the one? Carson, I know you fish, so you have a chance, right? Yeah. Because you're a disciple. And God chose a lot of people that were not qualified by the world standards, right?
So, right. Okay. How do I know what my spiritual gift is if I can't seem to hear God tell me or show me yet?
Okay. That is a very powerful one. I'm looking here real fast. We can go to the scriptures and see that. Well, I'll just say this. 1 Corinthians 12, if you read through 1 Corinthians 12, there's going to be a list of different types of gifts, right? There's a gift of prophesying, and prophesying is that of being able to take the word and speak it onto people's life. There's a gift of teaching. There's a gift of helping. There's a gift of, taking people in your home. There's all different types of gifts. And how are you going to find it? I like the spiritual gifts test, but what do you love doing? Do you like teaching? Do you like shepherding people? Do you like walking beside others? Don't focus so much on the gift as what is your passion?
Yeah.
And do that well. And because here's the thing, even though we may have one gift over the other, we're called to use them all, right? And so I would stay away from trying to figure out the gift. Focus on the passion first.
Right.
and journey through that.
Yeah, that's good. This next question kind of follows in with that as well. How do you decide between waiting for God to lead you down a path that He has for you, or seizing the opportunity in the moment?
I've seen both of them happen. What is that? It's like that's a very difficult question because it can mean for different things. I remember when God called us to Haiti, it was for Christy, it was a very long period, right? Then we got to Haiti, and I literally was having a quiet time one morning, and God's like, move out of the mission. I didn't hear him, but this was on my heart. Move out of the mission, take these 13 kids and start a mission yourself. And I'm like, okay, and didn't make made absolutely no sense. So it depends on the situation. I have seen this more times than not. If you're placed in a situation that it has to be made today, I would hold off on that, because many times that what appears to glitter is not always gold, and you may jump into something. So if somebody's telling you got to do it now or there's never, I would always tend to wait and see what God desires to do.
Yeah. And I think spend time in prayer and seek intentional advice of
absolutely
people that, you can answer a question on this, but you don't know the exact situation. And so I think seeking advice in your exact situation with people you trust and know will lead you to where God has called you to be.
Yes.
And through that so much
and people you trust, not people that'll tell you what you want to hear. I can go get the advice I want to hear from certain people, but there's times that I go to people that I know will speak straight up truth to me. Yeah. And so just remember that too.
Yeah. Okay, last question, very quick.
Question. What's the square root
of? What are y'all's favorite Bible translations?
I like Japanese.
Jonathan.
Okay. NLT to teach from, New Living Translation. If I'm wanting, so sometimes, here's how the Bible's translated. It's translated in paraphrases, right? Whether it's a paraphrase. The ESV, English Standard Version, is more word for word Greek to the English translation. So it's going to be word for word, more powerful, maybe in the sense of maybe the understanding, but sometimes it's a lot of words we don't use today. So I think in the world in which we live, and what I've gone back to is New Living Translation, because it makes the difficult more tangible. So,
that's good.
Is that it?
Yep.
All right, we're done.
All right, well, we will see you guys next week. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, we hope that something in today's episode helped encourage you to go throughout your week, and we will see you guys next week. Love you. Bye.